Over the very first step, you are a new sales associate and you're going to go out there and meet your first client. The first thing you have to do is determine your overall body lengths. Most of the time we are using your body as a way to measure properties, which is very important to be accurate. You cannot guess about this. You can't just say this is about the size of this. You need to get in there, and you're going to have to get in the beds. You're going to have to walk through trees. You're going to have to get in there and really figure out what these measurements are. Do not guess. Do not rough estimate this unless you are spot on. You've done this 10,000 times, but just forget I even said that. Don't estimate. You need to get in there and measure these things so they are accurate. It will save the design team a ton of time if you are accurate with your measurements. It will save the layout team a ton of time, because if they're sitting there trying to lay out a bed and you said a tree is in a spot, but it's not in that spot, you're in trouble, because then they might have to redesign the whole thing to try to accommodate that. You're talking hours and hours and hours of wasted time because you wanted to save a couple of minutes. Make sure you are accurate with your measurements. So the very first step is you need to get in there and figure out what everything is. Your body is a great tool once you know what it is. I am approximately 5'11". I rough it up to around 6 feet when I'm doing these, so I know these heights. I can come here, it's gonna stretch or whatever, but anyway, around 6 foot is what I say myself. And I don't know if you know these, there's some little things about your body that are pretty simple. As tall as you are equals when your fingertips are spread out from tip to the other tip of your fingertips is the same as what you are tall. So it is approximately 6 feet for me from fingertip to my other fingertip if I'm trying to figure out what a close distance is. Another great measuring tool is your hand. If you're walking up to a patio and you need to figure out what your distances are, like do I have enough clearance to lay pavers on an existing patio, then what you'll want to do is you'll want to walk up to the house slab and you'll want to measure it. So, for example, we've got some travertine here. Travertine is approximately 1 inch in thickness, which I've got a tape measure here to verify these distances. So it's right, got some travertine here, and this is right at 1 inch thickness. It's just a shade over. It's actually 1 inch and an eighth is what this travertine is. It's a natural stone, but let's pretend this is the house slab of the house is what you're measuring up to, and this is the house, and this is as high as we can go. We need to measure this distance, but a lot of times we don't have a tape measure. So you can stick your finger up in here and figure out what that is. So to me, I'm measuring from here to the bottom of this line, I would say right at about 1.5 inches, which is, yep, it's spot on right there at 1.5 inches where I'm at. So knowing these distances, so each one of these gauges here, for me, one fingertip there is 1 inch, this is 2 inch, this is 3 inches. So knowing these is very important. When you're going up to a house, you can actually say, okay, we have enough clearance or we don't. The next thing you're gonna wanna figure out are your steps. So my foot is approximately 12 inches when I'm wearing a shoe. So you can do small distances. You can actually step it off with your feet. So this is 1 foot, 2 foot, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so let me do that again here, walking towards you. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's a quick way to do a measurement if it's a short distance. Obviously, if you're trying to figure out like 100 feet or so, doing that would take a really long time. You would be much faster with a tape measure or rolling wheel. So the next distance that you'll probably use the most often is your pace. So that's what we call a step or a foot. You want to make sure that your pace is different, and you want to be very clear when you're taking your audio, your video recordings, whether it's a foot or whether it's a pace or a step. You want to make sure that you're being very clear to your team and they know exactly what you're talking about. The best way to figure this out, unfortunately, I don't have a 100-foot tape measure with me today, but is to lay a 100-foot tape measure out from this end all the way out, extend it all the way out. And you want to walk that 3 times and take the average. If you have a dead-on pace, then it should come out the same every single time. The key points to this are taking normal steps. Don't sit here and try to be robotic, because as you go out there in the field, you're not going to be doing that. You're going to be taking normal steps. So here's what I do. I pause and then I start walking. That way I don't just walk straight into something else. And if you're in a hurry, and you're probably going to be taking a bigger pace than you would normally. So the key point is stop, take a breath, and then start walking, okay? The next point is that when you're starting your pace, realize that your first foot does not count. So if this is my starting line, I want to step up to where I'm going, and then I want to start. 1, 2. Don't put your foot, if this is the starting line again, don't put your foot in front and then go, okay? So you need to make sure that you realize that this is where you're starting. Now, if you can't start, let's say this is a house, you need to start here. When you get to the end, subtract a foot and say that in the video. -1 foot, or it was 3.5 paces, or 3 paces and 1 foot. Make sure that you're clear on your audio what it is. Yes, a foot does matter when we're doing measurements. It can make a massive difference in material quantities. Don't guesstimate this, be accurate. So I'm going to demonstrate real quick to you what I would do. Start your, hopefully you've got a tape measure here. We'll get one for you if you don't. We'll lay it out. But you should always be carrying one of these just in case. So I'm going to demonstrate what I would do. Start here, and again I start my tape measure, my rolling wheel at the front of my toe. So your rolling wheel starts right here is 0, okay? It's not back here, it's not up here, it's right here is 0. So 2, 3. 9, 40, 41. A little bit over, so I'm backing up to where I'm exactly 100. So yeah, 41, and right now I've got a few inches over on my toe. So I'm going to say I'm half of a foot over. So I'm going to start it over. 41 plus half a foot is what my pace is. You want to be very accurate on this, because this is a measurement you're going to be using over and over and over again. And if you guesstimate this, every single measurement you take from this point forward is going to be wrong. So be accurate when you're doing this. Starting at 0 again. $42. So yeah, that time I came up with 41.5. So 41.5 paces. There was no half foot, it was a whole pace. So 41.5 paces. Again, this is a very inaccurate way. I'm just kind of demonstrating to you what you do. You want to walk back and forth and average those out for 3 times. The next thing is to know that whenever you're walking on a hill, your pace is very different. So if you're walking uphill, typically your pace is actually greater. So you're taking greater strides because you're kind of reaching your foot up as you're walking uphill. So know that as well too. You might take a tape measure, lay it out on the ground, and actually see what your pace is when you're walking uphill. So typically my pace is 2.5. I might actually walk like 3 feet when I'm walking uphill, depending on how steep the grade is. And when you're walking downhill, you're being a little more cautious. So your step is actually a little bit smaller than you would think. So my pace is normally 2.5 feet. It might be closer to 2.25 or even 2 feet, depending on how steep the grade is. Knowing these distances will save the company tons of time, tons of money. I just can't express to you how important your site analysis is to the overall process of what we're doing. So, but we need them to be quick is the reason why we use our measurements. So I'm going to go over to you with you next and how to actually measure trees and all that stuff. Stay tuned.